You're welcome along to the polling station. We finally had the Grey report. We'll have to sift through what that means for Boris Johnson, if anything means anything for Boris Johnson at this stage. There may have been some repercussions from the events in the US politically, as glib as that sounds, in another incredibly depressing incident of mass murder committed in a school in the US. And we also have the results of the Aussie elections, which was forecasted by Paul, you may indeed remember, but we will start with the Grey report. William, what did you make of it? There's been a mixed reaction from the press in Britain, as you would expect. I think on the latest count, we have 17 essentially people who've railed against Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party, but 54 needed in terms of getting him out. He's edging maybe a little bit closer to the abyss, but what did you make of it all?
So the Grey report, I think, was as expected. I think it made pretty ugly reading for Boris Johnson and for the government as a whole. There were also pictures of him as the event was proved that he misled Parliament, although Paul Brand, I think, got there first. Broadly speaking, it was as I expected, but that's still really quite bad. I just don't know what part of it anybody could read and think that either Boris Johnson or the government has come out well in all of it. And we have to remember this was taking place pre-vaccine, when people were going through a lockdown that a lot of people took massive sacrifices to adhere to. Just also on the MP number count, I think it's 21 now who have publicly called for Johnson to go on the record. The amount of letters that have been put into the 1922 committee is higher than that, I understand. I don't know where exactly. I think we're at threshold nearly. We're in the 45s to 50s, I think. His
leave office year, he's 8 to 11, 2024 or later. So, like, realistically, this isn't having any effect.
No, it wasn't the thing to sort of push him over. Nothing's going to be the thing that on its own does it. It will be death by 1,000 cuts or whatever. The issue for Johnson is twofold. Firstly, is that if you're an MP and you're waiting for Sue Gray, you didn't really have much joy from that report, did you? The optics are pretty terrible. Secondly, also, just going forward, it will become another thing that people will attach to either him or the Tory party or both. And that's spelling long-term trouble for the Tories at the next election, I think.
What did you make of it, Paul? He's obviously, as I said, a mixed reaction from the press. Some saying, oh my God, this is terrible. Others saying, sure, it was his birthday.
I mean, all that, again, it's predictable because the press, parts of the press are completely and utterly rigged, and they have been for years. But certainly, even the Mail, for all its lamentable history, under the new editor, is just taking things to a new level. It's now like Fox News or OAN or something. It's just an absolute fake news network. And the Panorama on Monday was predictably rubbish, although I must admit I couldn't even tolerate to watch all of it. I just had enough of Laura Koonsberg pretending to look shocked and surprised at something that there was just no way she didn't know about at the time. So I don't think there's any surprises there. It hasn't really changed my analysis either. I don't see how they can go into the next election with him. It's a matter of timing. I think that it is death by 1,000 cuts. The by-elections will be the next disaster. The cost of living crisis is killing them. And the big point being that he's destroyed so much trust that I don't think there's anything they could do or say that gets around that. I think every time, whether they're telling the truth or not, the majority of people won't believe them. He's just, it's a gift to Labour and the Lib Dems, an absolute gift. You could not ask for an easier point scoring situation, and really they can get away with anything themselves at the moment because no one will notice.
Yeah, he's now 8 to 11 and not to be Conservative leader at the next election unless he gets COVID 4 or 5 times more and people have sympathy for him or something. I just cannot see it how it happens. Interestingly enough, Neil, as well, Liz Truss had an article. She actually penned an article in the Irish Times this week about the protocol of all things on a bit of a charm offensive.
Oh, I hadn't actually seen that. Presumably somebody wrote that for her. I was just going to say there was a few things about the Grey report. I mean, I pretty much agree with everything Paul said, just to make a nice change. Yeah, I mean, yeah, mark the date down. I mean, yeah, like the market was interesting. I mean, look, just first of all, because we have to talk about grubby money and financial things and whatever. So the market on the Johnson leave date. Let me just get it in front of me. I should have done that before, shouldn't I? It's currently trading at 3.9 to 4.1 that he goes in 2022. Now, there was a time about a week ago where one particular punter became quite bullish about the chance of him surviving 2022, and he touched a peak of 5.0. There was a 5.0 guy that kept putting up sort of 300-400 quid, not huge amounts of money, but for this market, three-figure sums that come up and get taken. Quite often there's 848,000 matched on the market, and it was funny because Paul wrote an article, I think, at that time saying, "Oh, you got to bet 2022," and suddenly the 4-to-1 guy just got filled in. He got fed up with batting away Paul and his followers, and then Paul obviously thought, "Well, I might as well boost my position a bit more." Wrote another article, and it went from 4.5 down to, I think it went to 4.3, and then in the run up to the Gray report, and after, it was funny that the two things that happened this week were the ITV photograph, the pixelated photograph of Boris Johnson toasting and whatever. I did see one funny tweet where someone said, "Oh God, how much did you drink last night?" "Oh God, I got absolutely pixelated." But there was that photograph came out, and on the back of the photograph, there was a couple of photographs, weren't there? The market on Johnson leaving in 2022 went from sort of 3-to-1 down to, I got some matched laying 6-4, and then on the back of the Gray report coming out, it's gone back to 3-to-1 again. So it's like the market thinks that the photographs were more damaging than the Gray report, which basically tells you that the Gray report hasn't been as damaging as people thought it could be. I do agree that it wasn't going to be a sudden thing. We obviously know that Boris Johnson was never going to resign. Pretty much everyone's accepted that now. Even the most ardent centrist commentators on my timeline have given up asking for Boris Johnson to resign. They realise that they're just shouting into the void. It is a question of whether his MPs will gang up against him, but they did seem to come out in force in terms of supporting him this week. A couple of other things that I thought were quite interesting about it in terms of resignations was, in a properly functioning democracy, we might see some journalists resign. I mean, Paul touched on Laura Kuenssberg, but you're trying to tell me that no journalists, these people that knew every intimate detail, the Pestons and the Kuenssbergs of this world, that were getting texts galore at the Barnard Castle time and throughout, basically throughout the whole of the last 4 years, every little thing that happened in Downing Street. And you might say, well, yeah, they were getting a lot of that from Cummings and he's gone now. But, there are, as people keep saying, there are hundreds and hundreds of people that work in Downing Street. You're telling me that none of them were able to tip off any of these journalists as to what was happening? They all sat on the story.
One of the parties was for the guy who's now the Sun's deputy political editor.
Absolutely.
Oh, so
absolutely.
no one went
the
to that
leaving party.
It was a journalist. It was all civil servants. Come on.
Yeah. So that's one disgusting thing. And of course, the other disgusting thing is the performance of the Metropolitan Police. And, it's been a really good week for people that are in favour of defunding the police or for scrapping the Met and starting again. I mean, they have to, obviously they have no shame, but they should be very embarrassed by their performance. And of course, the Saj's brother being any part of the decision-making process, probably doesn't really help.
Yeah, I guess, William, there probably is a bit of fatigue.
Oh, can I quickly say two other things I wanted to say? Sorry, sorry, I will shut up after that. Just that there was a poll, wasn't there? There was a YouGov. Should resign, should remain in his role, that came out pretty much straight away after the Sue Gray report. And it was 59% should resign, 30% should remain in his role, and somehow 12% didn't really have an opinion on it. That was a bit odd. But I did think quite interesting when you broke it down between how they voted at the last election. 88% of people that voted Labour in the last election said he should resign, and only 6% should he remain in his role. But voted Tory in the last election, 63% said that he should remain, and only 27% said he should resign, which just shows you that people are just entrenched according to their politics. A lot of people can't wake up and say, well, hang on a minute, vomiting in Downing Street, being rude to the staff, leaving at 5 a.m, wheeling a karaoke machine in. Oh, hang on a minute, I'm a Tory voter. It's all fine, nothing to worry about, nothing to see here. Move on, move on. And the other very quick thing I'll say, the last thing I'll say, and then I really will shut up. There's a lady called Liz Bates. She used to work on Channel 4 News and she's moved to Sky now. And she used to be a staffer for Labour. So she's not particularly. She was a SPAD, I think, for Labour, and more in a not really my flavour of Labour, a bit more centrist than me. She tweeted and said, every time I go out of Westminster, and she works in the provinces, to now report on Partygate, lots of people tell me the same thing, regardless of their politics. It was wrong, but we're over it. You, the media, are obsessed. Please focus on more important things. Now, this is obviously music to Boris Johnson's ears. This is the message that the Tory party want to put out there. But I've watched quite a lot of Vox Pops in the last few days, and I hate Vox Pops as a kind of way of measuring stuff. But I do kind of feel like that is slightly where the public are on it.
Yeah, and yeah. Well, on that, William, I think people are just fed up of COVID-related stuff at this stage. They want to move on with their lives, and there's so many other issues that this is something that he actually could just get away with anyway, as reflected in the odds, not only in relation to Boris, but in relation to the by-elections as well, which haven't really swung at all.
I think there's there's a fatigue with it. The one thing I will say is that I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but some of the most effective stories in politics can just be based around fairness, right? But based around sort of equal treatment. And the thing that will annoy a lot of people, and I don't think you can ever get away from this recently, is firstly that they set the rules, however oppressive you might have thought they should be, or whether you think they were the right rules at the right time. They set them, then they broke them constantly over 8 months. And whilst that was happening, people had very personal, very difficult experiences, such as, not being able to say goodbye to loved ones as they passed away, missing all big moments in their lives, not just that, but losing out also on jobs and opportunity or whatever, due to the lockdown. So I don't think people will forget that, but I do think people will want to move on, I think, at some point. And yes, people are very, very much fatigued with all of that, with nearly everything to do with COVID. But that said, I don't think it will translate to people not caring about Partygate. Now, if they didn't care, it wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be as big as it was. And I think even Tory voters do care about it. I just don't think that they believe it should lead to Johnson going because of entrenchment.
So why, Paul, why are there not enough signatories to get rid of him within the Conservatives?
Well, as far as the MPs are concerned, and I think, again, regarding the market, these things are very, very sudden and quick. I can remember betting on the Theresa May exit and getting a fantastic price, about 2 days before they called the first vote of no confidence. And it's very similar in that, it's like the media are hopeless generally and they don't think ahead. And as soon as something becomes a story, a whole load of other people suddenly get involved in the market and start paying attention, and the odds collapse. And hence some of the mad movements in this. I mean, we're talking about movements just now. Remember that earlier in the year, January to March, traded odds on, right? And it's just that, new batch of punters who weren't playing the market before, right? Because they're not watching it all day long, like we are. And I think that it will be sudden when it happens. And going way back, sort of do the history lesson thing here, right? I can remember betting on Ian Duncan Smith to go. One of my biggest ever wins was Michael Howard to be next Tory leader at that time, right? And you would be amazed. I mean, Ian Duncan Smith was the most hopeless leader with no future, no prospect of winning whatsoever. And right up until an hour before they dumped him, the media was full of loyalists going on the TV and saying, no, he's doing a fabulous job. We have to stick with him, blah, blah, blah. And they just lie. They're lying, most of those MPs. The people who came out yesterday are the hardcore Boris Johnson loyalists, the cabinet, the payroll, the Nadine Dorrises of this world who wouldn't get a job otherwise. There's a big tranche of Tory MPs who aren't saying very much at all. And they're just waiting to see which way the wind blows, waiting for the signal, waiting for the timing. And it will come I think it will come this year, but I'm open to the idea that it could be next year. I think Neil's got a great price on next year. Now, you know,
I still think next year's quite a good price, actually, at sort of 3 to 1-ish.
Well, I think the bet is laying in 2024. The best bet throughout all of this has been laying 2024 or laying the next election, because that's the question. Are they really going to go into an election with someone with such entrenched negative approvals? Now, on the wider subjects, but are the public sick of it? I think, you know, again, all of this is possible. The general public don't think very much of politicians. This particularly has reinforced that, and it is a plague on all their houses. They don't trust the media for good reasons. And I can see how they would be sick of it. But the fact that they are sick of it doesn't necessarily translate into therefore they'll swing back behind Boris Johnson. You know,
all of those things play well for the Tories, don't they? Really, because turning people off of politics and turning people away from voting. You know, if the Tories could get a 50% turnout in the next general election, they'd have a much bigger chance of winning it.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen though, does it?
Well, I
mean,
know. Obviously, I was using 50% I don't really think there'll be a 50%, but the lower it is, the better it is for the Tories, is what I was trying to say.
I hear what you're saying, and it is, and that is part of their plan, right? I'm quite sure. But I would look at Australia. I think there's some really big signals from what happened in Australia. I underestimated it. I really underestimated it. I was only taking more notice at the end at who those independents were. And again, that was kind of like, you know, the Australian government was borderline fascist, very Trumpist, very populist. The former leader, who had previously been considered pretty right-wing, had now become considered a moderate centrist, Malcolm Turnbull, and was with these independents. And it was as if the electorate woke up and said, look, we will do whatever we have to do to remove these people. And that involves, if your place is a Labour place, vote Labour. But if not, vote for these independents. If it's a place where Labour can't beat them, vote for these teal independents to bring them down. And, you know, we saw this in the local elections. That's how I read the local elections. I think on Super Thursday, when I hope we'll be doing all this live and talking about it through in great detail, I think, again, there's going to be this pincer movement. Tories get hammered in the north by Labour and in the south by the Lib Dems. And I think that's where we're headed. I think that, yes, there's going to be 30%, 33% of the country who are rock solid Boris Johnson supporters. They will buy anything. They'll blame Labour for anything that happens. But that's a losing coalition. It's very reminiscent of Donald Trump.
Just on that, Williams, Dominic Reeve was on again. I think yesterday on the BBC, reiterating what he's been saying, but like his basic point, which I think is very hard to get away from, is that Boris is doing so much damage to the Tory brand here. The longer he's there, like, just the worse it is for the Conservatives going forward as an entity. Yeah,
absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. And I think the closer that he gets to the next election, the harder it is for any new Tory leaders to disassociate themselves from him, especially if that Tory leader happens to come from the cabinet, which is not impossible. You look at the betting now, many of the front runners are basically either loyal to Boris Johnson, they've said that he should stay on. The whole cabinet have basically pledged their loyalty to him. So separating from him is going to be very hard. And the Tories have reset effectively in the past, there's no doubt. It'll be harder this time. I think it'll be much harder this time. I do think it will anchor them down a bit.
Just to go back to you, Paul, on the Aussie election, does it encourage you at all? I mean, it's not like Labour were incredibly good on climate, but at least was the good guy winning in that regard. And Australia's had pretty shocking flooding, I think, over the last few weeks as well. Maybe this is a sign for future elections.
Oh, I think that's definitely a massive issue in Australia. And again, I think climate change is one of several issues that fit into that general progressive, we must change this status quo camp. Right? It's the same thing. You know, again, I think Joe Biden winning was very similar to that. They picked the candidate who would alienate the fewest people to build that coalition of people. Some people who care about climate change, some people whose emphasis is stopping fascism and racism, some people that would just get these divisive populist criminals out of the White House camp. You know, and you build that coalition. And yeah, I do think it's very encouraging that a country like Australia that has a media that's even more rigged than ours, you know, I mean, Rupert Murdoch's home country, could do that and could pull that coalition off. And I think, you know, again, it will be the same here. You know, I mean, we talked before about how much of an issue climate change will be at the election. The Tories, even if they want to take it seriously, even if some Tories take it seriously, they can't because of who their voter base are, because of who their donor base are.
Yeah.
You know, just like the Republicans can't.
And to stay with you, Paul, that what the events of the US, which are far too tragic to kind of, you know, turn into a debate about the future of politics. But and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been saying this is not necessarily conservative versus, you know, or Democrats issue, because Democrats have a little bit of blood on their hands in terms of the NRA as well. But I mean, this sort of stuff does, I mean, it does galvanize people against the nonsense of the Conservatives on the NRA, I would imagine.
I've got to say, I think if AOC said that, she's talking rubbish. Right? I'm not saying, look, 64% of Americans are against like gun control, but then you ask them the specific questions about AR-15s, about murderous weapons. It's overwhelming. And, you know,
wasn't she talking about a specific? There was a specific race about 2 weeks ago,
yes,
where the progressive candidate,
yeah,
the whole of the Democratic establishment threw themselves against the progressive candidate, and the candidate that they ended up getting had taken money from the NRA.
You could say at the same time that her candidate, Bernie Sanders, is the most probably has got the worst record on gun legislation.
Well, that's a little bit of a because that's a little bit of a tangent. Though she was specifically saying about this particular race from a couple of weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, she said accountability isn't partisan.
We could get into, because I haven't seen what she said, so I will get into that another time.
She said accountability isn't partisan. This was another failure of leadership. She, in fairness to her, she's trying not to make it a party thing, and she's like,
she should.
Yeah,
because the Obama administration tried to do loads on this, and Joe Biden tried to do loads on this, and the people who block sensible legislation on guns, which is not banning guns, right? It would be impossible to ban guns in America, and it would also be political suicide to ban guns. But to have background checks, right? To ban particular weapons of war from being freely available.
What are you suggesting?
Basic,
what world do you live in? I mean, this is crazy.
Well, the world that's bankrolled by fanatics, basically, and it is a partisan thing. And you know, this could, again, I don't think anything will happen on the gun front. I don't think, I mean, until the Democrats have like a 60-40 majority in the Senate, it won't happen, because there will always be, there's no way the Democrats will ever win the states that they compete in now. They'll never have 50 senators who are not in very pro-gun states. It's just not going to happen. Right?
Yeah, and the strange thing is, William, like, you're maybe a bit too young for this, but America's place in the world is shifting so radically. It's hard to know where this is going, because you wake up yesterday morning and America just looks an absolute shithole of a place that is run by absolute lunatics.
Yeah, it's really quite alarming from an outsider's perspective, I have to say. I mean, I know people make this point all the time, but just as an example, you know, all it took, well, I don't want to say all it took, but after Dunblane, you see these sort of
zero school murders in the UK since.
Yeah, and other tragedies have been basically just acted on very swiftly. But I think there is also sort of a larger cultural thing that goes back with regards to guns. You know, there are people bought guns in huge numbers for decades in America, particularly, I think.
This is going back to cowboys and Indians, though. I mean,
yeah.
This is completely insane. I think the gun record per person in America, if it's not 1.4, it's 1.2 per person. Like,
yeah.
Why can an 18-year-old with psychiatric problems go in and buy a gun like he's buying chewing gum? This is just insane.
One thing that does play a big part in this is the literal United States. You know, you are always going to find it much easier to move a blue state on this stuff than you will a red state. And then Texas's legislature doesn't even convene until next year, I think. So getting anything sort of concrete on the ground to enact this sort of stuff is sadly very far away. That's sort of all I feel I can offer on that, really.
I did feel Joe Biden was completely exasperated, although I do question the wisdom of him bringing why in God's name into a tweet as well, when God has absolutely nothing to do with this. Last words for any of you, actually. We're just coming to the end of the show.
Well, just on, I just want to get it back into America, because I think this feeds into the far bigger picture that's happening now. I don't know if you noticed, but on Sunday, Trump shared a post on his Truth Social thing saying civil war. Right? This was after he'd then had another complaint about the New York Attorney General who's investigating his finances and complained that Elon Musk's Twitter takeover might not happen and all this. And this was after he'd just come back, or he may still have been at this fascist conference in Budapest, right? We're sharing platforms with the worst of racists, the worst of anti-Semites there are to offer, right? And that is where that wing of the Republican Party is taking America. It is taking its civil war to splitting up. Now, perhaps not all is lost, because there is a bit of a fight back going on. And you see it over Ukraine, right? Where Mitch McConnell and the majority of Republicans have taken the position they always did take, which is to be against Putin, and they have supported Biden with the aid. And there's a group of Republicans who are all hardcore Trumpists, Rand Paul, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, etc., who are saying, no, it's disgusting. Why are we giving money to Ukraine? Why are we even backing Ukraine? You know, what's wrong with Putin? Putin's a peacemaker, etc. And McConnell's pushing back, right? And the majority of the Republican Party is pushing back. And this leads me to think that Trump is not the certainty that people think he is to gain the nomination. And the critical person who is looking like he will stand against him is Mike Pence. Right? I backed Mike Pence this week at 12-1 for the nomination.
Interesting.
So the big question has always been, will anybody run against Trump? Is anybody brave enough? It looks like he is, right? And another story that came out last night is that the January 6th committee have learned from Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, that Trump was agreeing with, cheering on Hang Mike Pence when his supporters were erecting nooses and singing Hang Mike Pence.
I would well believe that.
Yeah, so it looks like Pence is standing his ground. There's widespread speculation that he will run. He's preparing a campaign. I think that he will probably take the majority of whatever mainstream republicanism is now, right? And I think that's a bet. I think that probably is a bet, 12-1, 9-1. And I don't think Trump is a certainty to win it.
Maybe Pence, William, is like the climate, having put up with abuse for so long and kept quiet, and is going to just have this rage of a response and basically kill Trump. What do you think?
Paul makes a very interesting case, and I must say I read it on the Betfair Live blog, which I must say has been very, very helpful lately. I think it's I can see where he's coming from, and I think the benefit maybe of the huge amounts of polarization is probably the fact that if one person does decide to run against Trump, then that person will get all of the anti-Trump votes. They won't cut each other's throats, no way. The one thing I sort of have a little worry about, well, it's sort of twofold with this. It's number one, how energized are the anti-Trumpers to sort of get in there and have a lot of those political battles that will be needed, not just legislatively, but also culturally, I think, to sort of stop Trump. And number two, is Pence inspiring enough to be sort of that guy, to be the symbol of anti-Trump? I'm not saying like it has to be a razzle-dazzle show. I'm not saying he has to go around and sort of do a Bernie Sanders style thing, right? But if you're going to take on Trump, and no, you don't want to play his game, you've got to be somebody I think people can really sort of, hit the streets for. I wonder if Pence is that guy, but he might be the only one who runs, in which case all of my points I've made are all moot anyway.
Could I just say about that? Could you say about Pence? Yeah. So there's two things. Firstly, that Trump is not doing well in the primaries. A lot of the candidates he's endorsing are losing.
Did Dr. Oz get beat, by the way? Is it that?
It looks like he's going to win in a dead heat photo finish. It looks that way, but we're going to have a recount, right? But he only got 31%, which is grim, really, for a Trump endorsed candidate. But the big one was Georgia, where Trump directly went after Brian Kemp, the governor, and Brad Raffensperger, who refused to find him 11,000 votes. And they both won. And Kemp won by a huge margin with Pence campaigning for him. So there is a thing. And also go back, why did Trump pick Mike Pence in the first place? Because he is the hero of the evangelicals. He is rock solid with the evangelicals. Now, this is the Republican base. It's a very large part of it. And I do wonder if the evangelical base picked Pence over Trump, what that does to the balance.
Another bunch of absolute lunatics. Neil Channing, last word for you.
I'm glad you guys follow that. So the minutiae of the American election this far out, it's just too much for me to bear, really. I mean, I'm still refreshing Tiverton and Honiton on an hourly basis. So
it just makes it completely despair, though, that the land of the free is being reduced to this.
Oh, come on. I mean, I don't know. I spent a lot of time in the States in my life, and I haven't been for 6 years. I may never go again, I think.
Yeah.
Johnny, this is where it comes from. I went out there. I'd never been there in my life. I went out, got invited out in 2015, decided to tour the country and do the election. I went out there as a pundit. I had no real skin in the game. And it radicalised me because, like straight away, you can see this is fascism. Anyone who knows their history can see Trump is a fascist, that this is a fascist thing. And anyone with knows anything about global politics can see Putin's behind this. And, it changed my life. The funny thing is that my initial analysis of all of that was Trump won't win because he's not really a conservative. They'll pick a Ted Cruz. They'll pick a real hardcore hero of the evangelicals. And it was a great shock to me that, I did win on that because I backed Ted Cruz at silly prices. But, you couldn't just be a pundit. When you're faced with what is happening as serious as that in the world, with all the implications for Europe, for Britain, for everybody else, I don't see how you can sit on the fence.
Yeah, our sympathy.
Yeah, not when there's money to be made out of it.
Yeah, we're gonna leave it on that note. Our sympathies, obviously, to all those who died in the horrific shooting, and we'll see what lies ahead in the States politically, in terms of climate and in terms of everything else this summer. We will be back next week, hopefully in better form.